What exactly does creative new Chinese cuisine mean? Don't ask me. I don't have a clue. And before you think about asking the manager, she most likely doesn't either. That sentence, inscribed on a sign outside of where I worked, could be summed up in a single word: mysterious. The town where we lived was littered with Taiwanese style restaurants, though from what I heard, it only seemed to be a thing in this region. The managers and employees were all Taiwanese, and a lot of them didn't even speak Japanese yet. As for the stores themselves, they were always painted yellow and served cheap lunch, and the serving sizes, specifically for the deep fried stuff, were massive. I worked in one of those restaurants. Why? Well, it seemed like I'd get to do something productive with my time. It was better than just loitering around, in my opinion. I did kind of wonder what it said about me that I didn't have any plans on Sundays and instead choose to work, or whatever. The menus placed on the tables were used from store to store, it seemed, and all shared the same pictures of the individual dishes. Receiving food that barely resembled what you had ordered was a daily occurrence, to the point that getting what you wanted was actually by far the rarer outcome. This chain also happened to sell manga books, but their volume numbers, much like their contents, were all over the place. A cheap looking dragon decoration hung from the ceiling, giving the store a subtle exotic feel. I was fine working there. What I wasn't fine with, however, was the costume I was made to wear. Why did I alone have to work wearing a china dress? The dress was blue light, with embroidered flowers, and the long vertical slit completely exposed one of my legs. Now, you might have said that the skirt I had to wear to school exposed more on my legs, and you would have been right, but this was a different type of embarrassment. Maybe it was the luster that did it, who knows. When I asked the old manager lady why none of the other female employees had to wear one, her only answer had been, "You're young." Yeah, you didn't need to be smart to figure that one out. Though I had been working here ever since the summer vacation and was more or less used to it, I still often found myself getting embarrassed. A single car had already been parked in the parking lot that faced the building. There were still 2 whole minutes left until 5 o'clock, however, and none of the employees were doing anything other than sitting around. Was working precisely the right amount and not a second extra, perhaps part of their natural character. I, too, stared at the white car through the door, secretly hoping for a quiet day. At the exact moment the clock struck 5, one of my co-workers, an old lady, obviously Taiwanese, exited the store. She removed the large closed sign hanging over the door and turned on the lamp indicating that we were open. Having seen this, the doors of the white car parked outside opened. The sun had already begun to set, and it was a little dim outside. Fancy inventions such as streetlights were obviously unheard of around where we lived, and as such, I couldn't tell much about the figures making their way towards us, other than that they seemed vaguely human. The old lady returned inside. She only spoke broken Japanese, and after her came in a family of 4. Barely even looking at who I was speaking to, I repeated the same routine greeting for what must have been the millionth time by now. "Welcome in." Huh? My eyes froze, and I stopped speaking halfway through my sentence. The third person entering, after a middle-aged man and a woman, had been Shimamura. She quickly noticed me as well, and just like I had, opened her mouth in shock. Had I accidentally told her where I worked? I didn't think so. No, this was most likely a pure coincidence. And yet, I couldn't help but be taken aback. This really wasn't something I had been expecting to happen. Shimamura was already staring at me, clearly curious about me being there, as well as the dress I was wearing. I immediately hung my head. Oh, oh. I could feel her eyes scanning me up and down. Had it been anyone other than her doing it, I likely would have started yelling. The woman looked over at Shimamura and spoke to her. Your friend? Yeah, from school, she explained shortly, speaking just slightly faster than usual. A bit bluntly, which was explained by the fact that it was her mother she was talking to. Picking up on such a slight variation in her tone made me feel kind of happy for some reason. Just a little bit. I wonder why. These two people with her were likely Shimamura's parents. Her dad was slightly on the chubby side and gave off a gentle aura. Her mom was thin and had slender legs, but her shoulders were broad. Something about her told me that she was well disciplined. There was one more person standing behind her, sticking very close to her. This was Shimamura's little sister, the one we had talked about the other day. Our eyes met as I glanced at her. She proceeded to stare at me all over, likely curious about the china dress I was wearing. A china dress, huh? So you work in this kind of place, Adachi? This way, please. Not wanting to attract the attention of the other employees, I quickly guided them to a table. It was a square table, with two seats on either side. Shimamura's parents sat on the left side, leaving her and her little sister on the right one. The aforementioned girl sat practically glued to her older sister and was already reaching for the menu. The two were on good terms, it seemed. Before bringing them water and taking their orders, I glanced at Shimamura, still staring at me, and whispered, Do you see now why I said that it's going to be embarrassing? No matter how much I pulled, I simply couldn't hide my leg, peeking through the slit. Oh, come on. You don't need to feel embarrassed. I think it looks good on you. She said back to me with a lively smile on her face, clearly wanting to tease me. It was quite rare to see such an innocent expression on Shimamura's face. It didn't exactly feel like I was being praised. It was more like she had just said it to see what would happen. So your name is Adachi? The one speaking this time was Shimamura's mom. In the corner of my eye, I could see Shimamura's smile disappear and turn into a frown. Yeah, Adachi. And you're her friend? I was so much easier before she entered high school. Nowadays she rarely brings her friends over, and I have no idea who they are. That's because you don't need to know, Mom. Stop asking her questions. Shimamura shook her hand in an attempt to interrupt her mom, clearly annoyed. I could definitely understand her feelings. Is she in your class? I told you, stop it. Shimamura raised her voice. She was still shaking her hand, and seemed even more irritated than before. What? Her mom laughed back, deciding not to pay attention to her daughter's obvious dissatisfaction. This situation was one that my family too was very familiar with, I felt. I was no stranger to self-consciousness fueled feuds with my parents, especially when I'd still been in middle school. Nevertheless, seeing Shimamura act all flustered in front of me helped me calm down myself, just a little. So why did you, I wanted to ask her why she had come here, but had trouble getting the words out. Thankfully, Shimamura seemed to understand what I was trying to say, and answered me. Well, We saw an ad in the City magazine and started talking about how we should try this place out. I see. Silently, I cursed the manager for ever putting out those ads. I was really embarrassed and could only assume that the feeling was mutual, though she usually let it hang straight. Shimamura's hair was tied in a bun today. That slight change alone made her feel far more relaxed than usual. Or perhaps, as she was sitting next to her little sister, was the vibe I was sensing off her actually a sisterly one? It went without saying, but Shimamura's little sister's hair wasn't dyed, and varied greatly from that of her older sibling. It was black, most likely the same color Shimamura would have had she never dyed it. Wouldn't have looked bad on her, I thought. Please call me when you're ready to order. Thank you. First things first, I left the table. Though I might have been distracted by her mom's comment and forgotten about it for a moment, the fact remained that I was currently wearing a China dress. I simply couldn't bear showing off such an unusual outfit to Shimamura for any longer. Knowing Shimamura, I could rest assured that she wasn't going to start spreading rumors or anything. The only problem was, she herself was the person who I had least wanted to know. I walked as far away from her as I could, backing all the way to the entrance of the store. One of the old ladies I worked with was standing there. In broken Japanese, she asked me if she was my friend, and I nodded slightly. Yeah, Shimamura and I were friends. A level of relationship that no one would try to deny.